Hello everyone, this is Langston Key with the revisited version of the Hexmaps project. First, to kind of remind you where we left off, I had a ton of ideas from the previous project, which I ended in basically a state that allowed me to expand the potential ways that you could procedurally generate a hex map terrain. So I decided, based on my ideas from the last project, I would go ahead and expand on its use as a tabletop RPG tool, as that was sort of my original intention. And then finally, I would add more advanced procedural generation algorithms to make a more realistic land mass. So the first thing is rivers. I actually had rivers last time working in the game, but I wasn't able to include them in the generation process. So they're a little tricky to implement because they are different from any other cell. They require certain neighbors to be there for it to look right and for it to operate correctly. But in short, rivers are essentially created by making these channels between different hexes, as you can see in the bottom there. We'll return to rivers in a bit. As you can see in the top there, it looks pretty random in the top left, and adding maximal erosion makes it look very smooth, and then you can sort of go in between to have a nice in-between look. Essentially, the way erosion works is it takes any two pieces of land next to each other that has a difference, an elevation larger than 1, and it smooths it out. The cool part about this algorithm, and what you can see here from the code, is it actually will redistribute that land and conserving essentially the mass of the world into a lower plane than what's next to it. So if a mountain were to erode, then it would go into a valley nearby. Next is the water cycle. As you can see, based on this visualization created with a shader on the terrain that represents the elevation in the bottom left and the cloud cover in the right. So basically, the way the water cycle works is it sounds pretty advanced, but it's quite simple. Essentially, we just have a moisture content and a cloud content of every cell. And if a cell has water in it, then on the next cycle, it will essentially turn into clouds, and clouds will turn into water. And the cool thing about clouds, unlike moisture, they're able to be moved around by the wind. So on every time scale, any clouds will get shifted over on hexes nearby. And the way this works in the code is actually quite simple. You have the cell, and you determine if it's underwater. If it is underwater, the moisture will evaporate and sort of create a continuous source of clouds, like in the ocean. And then the precipitation will cause clouds to go away and moisture to appear on the hex. And there are mountains that actually have a cloud maximum, because the idea is mountains could be above the clouds, so any water will run down around them. And then the next thing is the cloud dispersal. The runoff variable here is basically it's actually kind of similar to erosion, except using water. So any higher water moisture will actually go to lower water moisture over time. Finally, we have temperature. This is actually probably the simplest of the advanced techniques. As you can see, we can determine a hemisphere for the top and the bottom, so it's sort of like a globe. We can also make it a simple gradient, like we're in the top hemisphere or only in the bottom hemisphere. And then we can add a bit of jitter and as well as elevation difference. So obviously mountains might be colder than a desert or something like that. And so using this temperature simulation in conjunction with all the other ones, we can actually create biomes based on moisture and the temperature. So for example, if you have a dry, hot area, that would probably be a desert. And if you had a cold, wet area, that might be a snow area. This is the code for the temperature in the biomes. Essentially, we just determine the hemisphere based on the latitude, and the temperature is purely just a lerp. It's not any more advanced than that. A lerp and then a bit of jitter as well as based on elevation. And then this is the actual biome part. So we're seeing first if the cell's underwater, and if it's not underwater, then we determine based on the moisture and temperature what biome it should be, and based on our matrix. And then we have an override for mountains. So the highest elevation maximum will actually always look like a snow-capped peak. Next, we have rivers. I won't go into detail in the code of this because it's fairly similar to the previous techniques, except with a little bit more finicky trial and error in terms of getting all the rivers to line up correctly and not look like a mess, as you can see in the top right. Essentially, what we do is we, once again, with this visualization, determine good candidates for a river origin. So a river origin needs to be high in altitude and high in moisture. And then once we determine that, we can say, oh, start a river here and basically snake its way all the way to the ocean. And if it doesn't get to the ocean, then we make a cool little lake on the way. Finally, the possibly most interesting part of this creative edition, and the one I was most excited for, was using one of my favorite tabletop RPGs, Knave Second Edition, to use for adapting to play. Essentially, this book is full of really cool tables, and I wanted to be able to use these tables in Engine to be able to produce a hex map that is actually what's called keyed. So it has all the things that you might expect to find in a campaign already on the map. I was able to fully implement the system, but maybe not every table in the system, which is kind of to the advantage of the project because I can demonstrate how easy it is actually to add a ton of tables to hexes and then determine which of these hexes do what job and what tables will appear on what kind of hex. So those are all things that you can determine using this tool. So as you can see, there's this hex tables list, and you can populate it either with items manually or with a CSV, which is what I'll be doing here. I don't think there's any tables online of Knave Second Edition, so I decided to go ahead and write a tool for myself that is able to transfer all of this really awesome information into a format that is readable for the purposes of this project. So in conclusion, I had so many ideas for this project and not enough time to implement them all. I learned about some tool customization and some custom structs. And I think I may have added what I thought was the most interesting part of my creative a little bit too late in the process. The tool is completely functional and it works great. But I think if I had more time to actually use the tool I made, then I might end up with an even better or maybe more usable for a Dungeon Master result. But regardless, this project was really cool and I genuinely see so much potential in just expanding this tool, expanding this project, and move on to the next one. Hope you guys have a great day.